Imagine a world where every video, every tutorial, every song you love, and every story you watch exists at your fingertips. Now imagine that behind this digital universe, there is a mind quietly shaping how we experience it, not with headlines or fame, but with vision, patience, and subtle genius. This is the story of Neal Mohan, the man who helped transform YouTube from a simple video platform into a global ecosystem of creators, ideas, and culture. Unlike many tech leaders, Neal's work isn't celebrated in the spotlight. He doesn't seek headlines or viral recognition. Yet his influence touches billions every day, shaping the way the world communicates, learns, and entertains itself. As we explore his journey, I want you to think about the moments in your own life where quiet focus and curiosity changed everything. Comment below. What platform or technology has impacted your life the most, and why? Because Neal Mohan's story reminds us that the most powerful influence is often unseen, built patiently, and guided by thoughtfulness rather than spectacle. Today, we'll travel through his early years, his rise at Google, his pivotal role at YouTube, and the leadership choices that made him one of the most important yet understated figures in tech history. So settle in, and let us begin the story of a man who speaks softly, thinks deeply, and shapes the digital world in ways few of us notice, but all of us experience. Neal Mohan's story begins quietly, in an environment where learning was not an obligation, but a natural part of daily life. He grew up in a household that valued curiosity, where questions were encouraged and books filled shelves like windows into different worlds. His parents nurtured a sense of discipline alongside imagination, giving him both structure and room to explore. Even in his earliest years, he displayed a calm attentiveness, observing how things worked and why they mattered. This balance of structure and wonder would later become the backbone of his approach to leadership. As a child, Neal often found himself fascinated by the hidden mechanisms behind simple objects. He would take apart toys not out of mischief, but out of a quiet desire to understand the logic inside them. He paid attention to patterns, how small changes created large results, how systems depended on the alignment of many tiny parts. While other children were drawn to noise and spectacle, he was drawn to quiet detail. Those silent moments, tinkering alone at his desk, were early signals of the analytical mind he would one day bring into the heart of the tech world. His curiosity extended beyond objects and machines. It reached toward the behaviors of the people around him. Neal watched how individuals communicated, how they shared information, and how stories moved through social circles. He noticed the moments when a conversation captured attention and when it faded, observing the invisible rules that shaped human interaction. These observations became early blueprints for the empathetic leadership style he would adopt later in life. Long before he ever heard words like user experience or engagement, he was already studying the fundamentals of how people connect. When Neal entered school, this blend of introspection and discipline quickly set him apart. Teachers saw in him a student who processed information deeply rather than quickly. He was not satisfied with surface-level understanding. He wanted to grasp the full picture. He often lingered after class to ask questions, not to impress, but to clarify the small details that fascinated him. His classmates sometimes mistook his quiet nature for shyness, but those who spent time with him realized he simply preferred thoughtful dialogue over loud debate. As he progressed through adolescence, Neal's interests expanded beyond curiosity into purpose. The rise of early computers and digital tools opened new possibilities for him, sparking questions that felt bigger than the ones he had asked as a child. He wondered how information traveled across machines, how interfaces made complex systems feel simple, and how technology could amplify human creativity. These new questions ignited something within him, a sense that the world was on the edge of transformation and that technology was the bridge to whatever came next. Neal wasn't simply studying change, he was preparing to participate in it. By the time he reached high school, he had developed a steady confidence that came not from boasting, but from a quiet certainty in his ability to understand difficult concepts. He joined academic clubs, collaborated on projects, and gradually learned how to share his ideas more openly. Each group activity taught him new lessons about teamwork, compromise, and communication. Neal saw how different personalities shaped outcomes, how each individual brought strengths that could either complement or conflict. These early team experiences planted the seeds for the collaborative leadership style that would define his future career. Transitioning into higher education marked a significant turning point in Neal's life. Leaving home and stepping into a diverse academic environment expanded his horizons in ways he hadn't expected. Surrounded by students from different cultures, disciplines, and ambitions, he began to see technology not as isolated tools, but as part of a global network of ideas and influences. Every lecture, every conversation, and every late-night study session widened his perspective. Neal realized that the systems he admired as a child were not just mechanical, they were social, emotional, and profoundly interconnected. He gravitated toward the subjects that offered both structure and creativity, challenging him to think logically while imagining new possibilities. Computer science, engineering, and economics all played roles in shaping his understanding of how technology fits into the broader world. He found himself drawn to courses that required long-term thinking, weighing risks against potential outcomes, and designing solutions that could evolve over time. These academic experiences refined his ability to think strategically, grounding his curiosity in a disciplined framework that would become essential in his later work. Outside the classroom, Neal absorbed lessons from the people around him, peers who dreamed boldly, mentors who taught with passion, and advisors who emphasized character as much as achievement. He learned that excellence was not about rushing toward success, but about moving with intention. He observed how some people burned out, chasing quick wins, while others thrived by focusing on long-term goals. Neal quietly chose the latter path, understanding that patience often yields deeper insights and more meaningful results. This mindset became a hallmark of his future leadership. Despite the heavy workload of college life, Neal found moments to reflect on the path he was building. He understood that his strengths lay not in being the loudest visionary, but in being the most thoughtful architect behind the scenes. He recognized his ability to bring clarity to complex problems, to calm chaos with steady logic, and to make decisions by balancing data with empathy. These qualities made him not only capable in his studies, but ready for larger responsibilities waiting beyond graduation. It was during these years that Neal began to see himself not just as a student, but as someone preparing for a role that required both intellect and integrity. As he completed his academic journey, Neal carried with him a set of values that would guide every step of his career: curiosity, discipline, empathy, and a commitment to long-term vision. He had learned to take systems apart and understand their inner workings, but he had also learned to build connections between ideas, people, and possibilities. He understood that leadership was not about authority, but about alignment, bringing together diverse talents and perspectives to create something greater than the sum of its parts. These were not just skills, they were the foundation of his identity. With his education complete, Neal was ready to step into the professional world, though he had no way of knowing how far that journey would take him. He carried the quiet confidence of someone who had prepared deeply, not through shortcuts, but through years of patient study and thoughtful exploration. He was not looking for fame or recognition. He was searching for opportunities to apply his strengths with purpose. What awaited him next would challenge his mind, test his values, and gradually shape him into the leader capable of stewarding one of the most influential platforms on Earth. As Neal took his first steps into the tech industry, He brought with him the same quiet curiosity that had defined his childhood. The world was changing rapidly, shaped by new digital tools and expanding online communities, and he wanted to understand how these transformations would influence the way people communicated and created. He approached every opportunity with humility and intention, never rushing ahead, but always moving forward. The journey he was beginning was not destined to be loud or dramatic. It would unfold in steady momentum, driven by careful thought and a commitment to making technology work for people rather than the other way around. Neal Mohan carried the memory of those childhood evenings, the warm buzz of family conversations, the smell of spices drifting from the kitchen, the soft hum of the Bangalore night, as he stepped into the next, much larger chapter of his life. If the early years had planted the seed, this was the moment when everything began to stretch toward the sky. He was no longer the boy quietly examining circuit boards under a yellow lamp, nor the teenager saving lunch money to buy used computer magazines. Now he stood at the threshold of a world he had only imagined, a world where ideas traveled faster than words, and where ambition was not just encouraged, but expected to burst beyond its boundaries. His arrival in America was not marked by drama or cinematic triumph. It was quiet, almost ordinary. A plane touching down, luggage rolling across a cold airport floor, a young man adjusting the straps of a worn backpack while trying to absorb the scale of everything around him. But sometimes the greatest shifts in our lives come disguised as calm moments. Neal felt it the way one feels a change in the air before a monsoon rain. The world was bigger now, much bigger, and somewhere inside that vastness, he sensed, his path was waiting for him. Stanford did not greet him like a dream fulfilled. It greeted him like a test of endurance. The campus glowed with the confidence of people who already seemed destined for greatness. Conversations floated past him, students debating algorithms as casually as discussing last night's dinner, project teams forming, with the effortless speed of birds adjusting their flight, professors whose words carried the weight of the decades of research and world-shaping ideas. Neal listened more than he spoke, observed more than he reacted, absorbed more than he displayed. It wasn't shyness. It was strategic patience, the same quiet focus he had learned in India, watching his father repair electronics with an almost meditative calm. He found himself drawn to late-night computer labs, rooms that echoed with the rhythmic tapping of keyboards and the soft whirring of machines processing data. Here, he studied not just code, but the people who wrote it. Some were restless visionaries chasing impossible dreams. Others were methodical builders, shaping systems brick by digital brick. Neal admired both. He understood that real innovation lived somewhere in the tension between imagination and structure. And so he positioned himself in the middle, learning to navigate that balance with the same deliberate precision a pilot uses to keep an aircraft steady during turbulence. His professors noticed. They saw a student who never rushed to answer first, but whose responses, when finally spoken, seemed unusually grounded. They saw a thinker who wasn't satisfied with surface solutions. Neal often questioned the underlying assumptions, probing for the logic behind the logic. He treated technology not as a playground, but as an ecosystem, interconnected, fragile, and powerful. It was a perspective that would eventually shape the future of online video, long before YouTube had become the heartbeat of global communication. But at the time, Neal wasn't chasing fame or preparing for a monumental career. He was simply trying to understand how technology could be used to solve real human problems. The internet was still a raw, unpredictable frontier. Websites loaded slowly, connections broke often, and video streaming was almost a mythical idea, a shimmering promise that technology couldn't quite catch yet. Still, Neal saw something in those early limitations. He sensed a future where digital media wouldn't just be consumed, but shared, shaped, and democratized. A future where storytelling became borderless. His closest friends recall him as a calm presence in an environment that thrived on chaos. While others panicked during exams or raced through assignments, Neal approached everything with an engineer's stillness. He made coffee quietly, listened attentively, and solved problems in a way that made stress feel unnecessary. This calmness, almost a signature trait, would one day become his stabilizing force as he guided YouTube through storms that could have collapsed the platform entirely. But before that future could unfold, he would have to step into the unpredictable world of Silicon Valley, a place where ideas could make you a millionaire by Monday and leave you unemployed by Thursday. Reinventing yourself was the default skill here, and Neal, with his grounded personality and methodical thinking, didn't fit the stereotype of the flashy startup visionary, but Silicon Valley had always rewarded those who could see the deeper patterns beneath the noise. His first job after graduating was not glamorous. It involved long hours, endless lines of code, and the kind of technical challenges that drained most of his colleagues. But Neal thrived. He discovered that complexity energized him. Systems architecture wasn't just engineering, it was storytelling through structure. Every decision was a narrative choice. Every solution was a plot twist. He was crafting the invisible frameworks that allowed digital experiences to exist. And though few people saw his work, the impact was waiting to grow. During those years, he developed something rare, the ability to blend technical depth with a strategic mind. Most engineers built systems. Neal built futures. He could look at a product and imagine not just what it could do today, but what it could become 5 or 10 years later. That ability made him invaluable, and soon companies began noticing the quiet engineer who operated with the composure of someone twice his age. Yet his success was not linear. There were failures, projects that collapsed, ideas that didn't survive, moments where teams disagreed so intensely that progress seemed impossible. Silicon Valley was ruthless that way, but Neal learned to treat setbacks the way his father treated malfunctioning circuit boards, with patience, curiosity, and a belief that every problem hinted at a deeper truth. He never saw broken systems as failures, only as puzzles waiting to be understood. This mindset prepared him for the opportunity that would alter not just his career, but the entire online world, leading advertising strategy at Google. At first glance, it was an odd fit. Ad systems were often viewed as the less glamorous side of tech, overshadowed by flashy consumer products. But Neal saw what others did not. He saw that digital advertising, if built with precision and fairness, could fuel the platforms that democratized information across the planet. And so, he accepted the challenge. His role quickly expanded as he demonstrated a remarkable ability to bring order to complexity. Google Ads was a labyrinth of moving parts, but Neal approached it as an ecosystem that needed balance, clarity, and long-term vision. The systems he helped shape would become the revenue engine powering Google's most ambitious innovations, from global data centers to AI research. It was during this period that his reputation evolved from reliable engineer to architect of scalable ideas. He began influencing projects that extended far beyond ads. His strategic insights caught the attention of leaders across the company. They saw in him something rare, a technologist who understood human behavior, user experience, global culture, and business sustainability all at once. So when the moment came when Google's newly acquired platform called YouTube needed someone who could guide it safely through the battles ahead, the choice became remarkably clear. YouTube was chaotic, rebellious, fast-growing, and full of potential. It needed a leader who could transform unstructured energy into something stable without crushing the creative spirit that made it magical. Neal Mohan was that leader. He didn't know it yet, but his years of quiet preparation, his calm approach to pressure, his global perspective, and his instinct for long-term ecosystems were about to converge into the defining chapter of his life. Because YouTube was about to change the world, and he was about to become the person responsible for shaping the platform that billions would one day rely on. And as he stepped into that role, he carried with him the same soft determination that had guided him since childhood, the belief that technology should not dominate people, but empower them. He didn't want to build a company. He wanted to build a canvas where anyone, anywhere, could share their story. That belief would guide him through controversies, breakthroughs, cultural shifts, and technological revolutions. It would define his leadership and ultimately lead him to becoming CEO of the largest video platform on Earth. But at this early stage, he was simply a man stepping forward, unaware that the path he had chosen would reshape modern media and influence how humanity communicates. His story was just beginning, and the world had no idea how much it was about to change. In the years after Neal Mohan joined Google and began shaping YouTube from the inside, his world expanded far beyond product meetings and engineering diagrams. He found himself standing at a crossroads where creativity, technology, and global culture were converging in ways no one had fully predicted. What had once been a small, scrappy video sharing site had grown into an international force, attracting millions more users by the month, each contributing new voices, new ideas, and new possibilities. Neal approached this evolution with the same quiet discipline he had carried throughout his life, observing patterns in the chaos and searching for long-term structure where others only saw short-term noise. He sensed that YouTube wasn't merely growing. It was transforming into something far larger than a platform. It was becoming a living ecosystem. As he settled deeper into his role, he began noticing a recurring theme in the platform's development. Every major opportunity came paired with an equally significant challenge. For every new creator who found their voice, there was another struggling to understand the system. For every groundbreaking technological advancement, there was a looming question about fairness, safety, or sustainability. Neal understood that his work would never be about quick fixes or flashy announcements. Instead, it would require patience, resilience, and the ability to navigate competing priorities while keeping the platform's future firmly in sight. This mindset guided him as he stepped into one of the most complex chapters of his career. Much of his early work revolved around stabilizing the foundations of YouTube's business, which at the time were still surprisingly fragile. Advertisers were uncertain about online video, and many questioned whether it was safe to associate their brands with user-generated content. Neal spent countless hours meeting with teams, analyzing data, and redesigning the structure behind YouTube's advertising model. He approached the problem with a builder's mindset, believing that if he could create a system that rewarded both advertisers and creators, the entire ecosystem would benefit. Slowly, through careful planning and relentless iteration, he helped transform YouTube into one of the most powerful advertising platforms in the world. But growth brought new concerns. As the platform ballooned in size, content moderation became a daily battle with stakes far higher than anything YouTube had faced before. Misinformation, harmful content, and global political tensions all began to collide inside the digital space. Neal recognized early that trust would become YouTube's most valuable currency. Without it, everything else would crumble. He championed the expansion of safety teams, stronger guidelines, and improved machine learning systems that could detect problematic videos before they spread. His approach was methodical, guided by the belief that safety and creativity were not opposing forces but essential partners in a healthy online community. Even as the platform confronted these challenges, Neal worked to protect the creative spirit that made YouTube unique. He knew that creators were the heart of the platform, and he believed deeply in their ability to shape culture in ways traditional media could not. He pushed for improvements to the Creator Studio, demanding tools that were not only powerful, but intuitive enough for anyone to use. He fought for clearer communication, insisting that creators deserve transparency about monetization, policies, and algorithmic recommendations. His vision was simple. If creators trusted YouTube, they would continue building the future of online expression. As YouTube matured, a new era of creators began emerging, one defined not by short-term trends, but by the pursuit of long-term careers. These creators built communities rather than audiences, and their influence reached far beyond entertainment. Educators transformed classrooms. Fitness coaches built global communities. Historians, journalists, musicians, chefs, and storytellers discovered new ways to share their passions with the world. Neal watched this evolution with quiet admiration. He sensed that YouTube had become more than a platform. It had become a mirror for humanity's creativity, resilience, and diversity. With that realization came a new challenge, ensuring that YouTube could support multiple forms of content without compromising its identity. Neal had long believed that video was not a single medium, but a collection of formats: short clips, long documentaries, live streams, tutorials, music, podcasts, and everything in between. He encouraged teams to experiment with new features that could accommodate these emerging styles, always careful to maintain balance between innovation and stability. He understood that YouTube's future depended on flexibility, yet he also knew that rapid changes could easily disrupt the creator ecosystem. His leadership required both boldness and restraint, a delicate combination that became his signature approach. At the same time, YouTube's global footprint brought new cultural responsibilities. The platform was no longer just an American phenomenon, it was a worldwide stage, used by people in every corner of the planet. Neal worked closely with international teams to understand local needs, cultural sensitivities, and regional trends. He believed that YouTube had a duty to respect the communities it served, adapting its systems and policies to align with different languages, values, and expectations. This commitment shaped how YouTube navigated global challenges, helping it grow without losing the trust of diverse audiences. Yet, behind the scenes, the work was far from easy. Algorithms needed constant refinement. Policies required meticulous revisions. Crises erupted without warning. Every day brought a new challenge, a new debate, a new question that could influence billions of people around the world. Through all of it, Neal remained grounded in his long-held values: thoughtfulness, empathy, and a deep belief in the potential of technology to uplift rather than divide. His calm presence became a stabilizing force for teams navigating uncertainty, and a reminder that leadership was not about volume, but clarity of purpose. As years passed, Neal's influence began to shape YouTube in ways that were both visible and invisible. He redesigned systems that most users never thought about, but relied on every day. He worked behind the curtain to protect the platform's integrity while amplifying its creative heartbeat. He made decisions that required courage and foresight, often with limited time and immense consequences. And although he rarely sought recognition, those closest to the work understood how much of YouTube's evolution carried his fingerprints. By this point, Neal had become more than an executive. He had become a steward of a digital culture that was still learning to understand itself. He knew that the platform he helped shape had the power to change lives, influence movements, and unite people across borders. And he felt a growing sense of responsibility as the world became increasingly dependent on online platforms for connection and expression. His journey had brought him to a place where every decision carried weight, and where every choice shaped the future of millions of creators who had entrusted their voices to YouTube. But his most defining challenges and his greatest opportunities still lay ahead. The next chapter of the story would test everything he had built: his resilience, his leadership, his philosophy, and his ability to guide the platform through some of the most turbulent moments in its history. It would be a period of rapid cultural shifts, global uncertainty, and unprecedented reliance on digital platforms. And it would set the stage for the moment when Neal Mohan would be called to step into the role that would define his legacy. There comes a moment in Neal Mohan's journey where the world around him seemed to be accelerating faster than anyone could reasonably keep up with. Digital behavior was shifting, online communities were expanding, and the very definition of entertainment was dissolving into something fluid and unpredictable. As YouTube grew from a scrappy platform full of cat videos and shaky vlogs into the beating heart of global culture, Neal found himself in the center of a storm he did not create, but was now responsible for steering. His days became longer, his nights shorter, and every decision carried a weight that reached far beyond Silicon Valley. It wasn't just about engineering or policies anymore. It was about safeguarding the world's largest public stage, a place where billions expressed themselves, argued, dreamed, taught, laughed, and sometimes caused harm without meaning to. What kept Neal grounded was the quiet discipline he had carried since childhood, the same discipline that pushed him through Stanford's toughest engineering programs and later guided him in the chaotic environment of early-stage Google. Even as the world fixated on YouTube as a cultural giant, he still saw lines of systems, patterns of behavior, and the simple but powerful structures underpinning digital ecosystems. But beneath those structures were real human stories, creators trying to pay rent, educators trying to reach students, families recording memories, and communities rallying around shared passions. YouTube was no longer a tool, it was a lifeline for millions, and Neal knew that every improvement, every safeguard, every policy tweak would ripple outward into lives he would never see and people he would never meet. In those years, something deeper began forming inside him, a sense of responsibility that felt almost parental. He watched creators grow from small channels to full-fledged media forces. He saw activists use YouTube to shine light on injustices that mainstream media overlooked. He watched musicians break into global fame from bedrooms lit only by a laptop screen. Neal wasn't just optimizing a platform. He was shaping the backdrop of modern storytelling, and yet, with every success came a shadow, a reminder of how fragile this digital landscape truly was. One misguided recommendation, one poorly implemented policy, one overlooked vulnerability could have consequences stretching across continents. Those challenges pushed Neal to think more deeply about what online freedom truly meant. He never wanted YouTube to become a sterile, overly controlled space where creativity suffocated. But he also knew that unrestrained freedom could quickly turn into chaos. This tension between openness and safety, between creative expression and responsible moderation, became his daily battle. In countless meetings, he pushed teams to think not just about algorithms, but about people, not just metrics, but impacts. He asked questions that forced engineers and executives alike to confront uncomfortable realities, and in those moments, he felt the weight of being a steward rather than a ruler, guiding an ecosystem rather than controlling it. Yet, even as he navigated these complexities, Neal remained remarkably calm. Colleagues often described him as collected to the point of being unshakable, someone who could listen to conflicting perspectives without losing his sense of direction. It wasn't detachment, it was focus. The same kind of focus he developed as a young student staying up late to solve engineering problems long after everyone else had gone to sleep. The same focus that later helped him negotiate Google's massive acquisition deals with a clarity that surprised even seasoned executives. To Neal, chaos was something to be understood, not feared. But beneath that calm exterior, there were days when Neal felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of it all. He rarely showed it, yet he carried the knowledge that billions relied on YouTube's stability, fairness, and transparency. It wasn't like building a product for a niche market or designing software for a single demographic. YouTube was used by children, grandparents, activists, scientists, comedians, teachers, historians, musicians, and people from every corner of the world. Any decision, no matter how small, could change how someone learned, worked, or expressed themselves. And that knowledge stayed with him, quietly shaping every choice he made. During this era, Neal also became deeply aware of the global influence creators were beginning to wield. They weren't just entertainers, they were cultural ambassadors, trendsetters, educators, and advocates. Some could mobilize millions with a single upload. Others built communities that became safe spaces for people who felt alone in the offline world. Neal understood that supporting these creators wasn't simply about monetization or tools. It was about giving them platforms to shape their own futures, to lift others with them, to build something meaningful in a landscape that often felt intangible. He admired their resilience, their creativity, and their willingness to take risks he himself might never have dared to take. This period also deepened Neal's appreciation for the invisible work happening behind the scenes, engineers refining systems that analyzed billions of videos, safety teams evaluating harmful trends that emerged overnight, policy analysts monitoring global laws that shifted like shifting tides, content moderators quietly sorting through the internet's darker corners so the rest of the world wouldn't have to. Neal saw all of it, respected all of it, and understood that YouTube's greatness came not from its scale, but from the countless people who poured their expertise into keeping it functional, inclusive, and inspiring. And yet, he never lost sight of the fact that YouTube needed to evolve. The world was changing faster than ever. AI was advancing, misinformation was spreading, and audiences were becoming more fragmented. The traditional systems that once kept everything stable were no longer enough. Something deeper, something more adaptive, had to be built. Neal found himself constantly re-evaluating old assumptions, rethinking long-held practices, and challenging teams to innovate before problems even emerged. It was a constant push forward, a reminder that comfort was dangerous in a world built on rapid change. In the quiet moments, rare as they were, Neal often reflected on his own path. The long nights in Stanford's computer labs, the early days at Google when the company felt like an experiment rather than an empire, the unexpected journey that brought him to YouTube, a place he hadn't planned to lead but gradually grew to love. He realized that every twist in his life had prepared him for this strange, expansive responsibility. The technical foundation gave him clarity, the business experience gave him discipline, and the human stories gave him purpose. What struck him most deeply was how much YouTube had become a mirror of the world, its hopes, its fears, its beauty, and its flaws. To lead YouTube was to understand society itself, its dynamics, its shifting cultures, its emotional undercurrents, and in that mirror, Neal found both challenge and meaning. He wasn't just building a platform. He was helping shape the collective memory of an entire generation. Every documentary uploaded, every tutorial shared, every story preserved on YouTube became part of a digital archive that would outlive all of them. And somewhere within that realization, Neal felt something unexpected, hope. Not naive optimism, but a quiet belief that if guided well, YouTube could continue empowering people everywhere. Whether they were creators trying to share their passion, students hungry for knowledge, or ordinary viewers looking for comfort in a chaotic world. He believed that technology, when shaped with care, could amplify humanity's best qualities rather than its worst. And he believed that his role wasn't to stand above the world's creators, but to stand behind them, supporting their journeys while letting them shape the culture in their own voices. By the time Neal Mohan had settled into his deeper responsibilities at YouTube, the platform had grown into something almost unrecognizable from its early days. What had once been a collection of videos shared among hobbyists and friends had transformed into a sprawling global ecosystem that touched billions of lives every day. The sheer scale was staggering, and with it came challenges that tested every ounce of patience, insight, and empathy he had cultivated over years of study and experience. Neal understood that running a platform like YouTube was not simply about technology or business. It was about human connection, culture, and the very ways in which people told stories to one another. Every design decision, every policy tweak, and every algorithmic adjustment had the power to influence human behavior in ways no one could fully anticipate. And he approached this knowledge not with arrogance, but with a deep, almost reverential sense of responsibility. During these years, Neal became acutely aware that YouTube's growth was both a blessing and a burden. The rise of mobile technology meant that users were watching, creating, and sharing content at speeds no one could have predicted. Audiences were no longer passive consumers. They were active participants shaping trends, spreading ideas, and creating entire subcultures overnight. He watched as creators transformed from casual enthusiasts into influential figures whose reach extended far beyond the platform. Some built careers from scratch, earning livelihoods while inspiring millions, while others navigated the complexities of fame in a digital age that could be as unforgiving as it was rewarding. Neal recognized that the platform's algorithms and policies could amplify these effects, for better or worse. And he spent countless hours contemplating how to ensure the balance favored human creativity and responsibility over chaos. The challenge was not just technical, though the engineering demands were immense. It was ethical, social, and cultural. Neal observed patterns emerging across communities, noticing how content could both unify and divide, educate and misinform, inspire and unsettle. For every creator finding their voice, there was another struggling with harassment, misinformation, or financial uncertainty. Every viral trend carried with it unintended consequences, and every policy change risked alienating someone who depended on the platform. Neal approached these complexities with a methodical patience, convening interdisciplinary teams, listening deeply to creators, engineers, and policy experts, and synthesizing diverse perspectives into decisions that were both precise and humane. He understood that leadership at this scale required not just intellect, but wisdom, a nuanced understanding of the people who lived within the ecosystem. In the midst of these challenges, Neal also began to focus on the human stories behind the data. He saw young educators building classrooms for millions of students, musicians launching global careers from bedrooms, and storytellers preserving histories that would otherwise have been lost. Each story reinforced his conviction that YouTube's true power lay not in its technology, but in the people who used it to express themselves and connect with the world. He started thinking in terms of impact rather than metrics, asking questions that guided every decision. How will this affect creators' livelihoods? How will this shape global culture? How can we ensure that creativity is nurtured rather than suppressed? These questions became the core of his philosophy, quietly shaping the platform's evolution. Yet, even as he refined these systems, Neal had to contend with the enormous pressures of scale. Content moderation, which had once been manageable, became an increasingly delicate balance of automation and human judgment. Algorithms designed to surface engaging videos could inadvertently promote harmful or misleading content. Advertisers, essential to the platform's sustainability, were wary of associating with anything controversial. Every decision carried consequences far beyond the boardroom, and Neal bore that responsibility with a combination of meticulous planning and calm determination. He understood that a single misstep could ripple across millions of lives, and he approached each challenge as both a problem to solve and a responsibility to honor. During this period, YouTube's creator economy underwent a remarkable transformation. Channels that had once been hobbies became full-fledged businesses, offering education, entertainment, and community to global audiences. Some creators developed entire ecosystems around their work, hiring teams, producing high-quality content, and engaging audiences with unprecedented depth. Others focused on niche topics, cultivating loyal viewers who valued consistency and authenticity. Neal watched these developments closely, not just as a product executive, but as someone who understood the delicate ecosystem sustaining creators' success. He encouraged tools and systems that allowed creators to flourish, ensuring that monetization, discoverability, and community features were aligned to support long-term growth rather than short-term trends. It was during this time that the platform's identity became more firmly defined. YouTube was not just a distribution channel, it was a place where culture, commerce, and human creativity intersected. Global expansion further complicated his work. YouTube had grown far beyond English-speaking markets, reaching corners of the world where cultural norms, legal systems, and online behaviors differed dramatically. Neal worked tirelessly to ensure that policies and tools could adapt to these diverse contexts. He listened to teams from India, Brazil, Europe, and Southeast Asia, learning the unique challenges they faced and seeking solutions that would be sensitive to local audiences while preserving a cohesive global platform. This required a delicate balance, implementing scalable systems that respected cultural nuance without fragmenting the experience or compromising safety. Neal's ability to navigate this complexity quietly became one of his most valuable traits, earning the trust of both international teams and creators worldwide. Despite the enormous technical, ethical, and logistical challenges, Neal maintained a calm presence that inspired confidence. Colleagues often remarked on his ability to remain composed even in high-pressure situations, listening more than he spoke, observing more than he reacted. This calmness was not passive, it was active, grounded in discipline, experience, and a deep understanding of the platform's stakes. He became a stabilizing force for teams navigating uncertainty, guiding them not through mandates or control, but through thoughtful questions and careful reflection. His leadership style allowed innovation to flourish even under the weight of constant scrutiny and evolving global demands. As creators continued to push boundaries, Neal remained attentive to the subtleties of audience engagement. He noticed patterns in how communities formed, how trends spread, and how content could influence thinking across borders. He encouraged experimentation with new formats, interactive tools, and creator-led initiatives, always with a mindfulness of long-term impact. His philosophy was simple yet profound. YouTube should empower creators, honor viewers, and safeguard the integrity of the platform. Everything else, algorithms, monetization, analytics, served that larger purpose. This clarity of vision allowed him to make decisions that were both bold and responsible, shaping YouTube into a platform that could scale without losing its essence. In quieter moments, Neal reflected on his own journey, tracing the path that had brought him here. From the disciplined student navigating the complexities of engineering, to the rising executive at Google, to the leader shaping one of the most influential platforms in the world. Each experience had taught him lessons in patience, empathy, and strategic thinking. Each challenge had prepared him for the weight of decisions that could influence millions. And as he looked ahead, he knew that the most defining chapters of YouTube's story, and his own, were still being written. The platform's potential was vast, its responsibilities immense, and the intersection of technology and humanity more complex than ever. Neal's steady, thoughtful approach became the quiet force guiding YouTube through the turbulence of growth, innovation, and global expansion, ensuring that the platform's impact remained meaningful, ethical, and transformative. He carried that memory of the early YouTube chaos, the improvisation, the uncertainty, the strange sense of both power and fragility, as he stepped into the next phase of his journey. By this point, Neal Mohan was no longer just a problem solver working behind the scenes. He was becoming a quiet architect of the Internet's most unpredictable city. The world was changing fast around him. Smartphones were flooding every pocket. Creators were beginning to realize that YouTube was more than a hobby. And advertisers were trying to understand whether this unruly digital landscape could ever feel stable enough to trust with their money. Neal felt each of these forces pressing against him every day, reshaping the platform like shifting tides around a coastline. It wasn't chaos anymore. It was evolution, messy, relentless, and full of questions no one had answers for yet. He would wake up some mornings with numbers ringing in his head. Hours watched, new uploads per minute, bandwidth costs, advertiser retention. But beneath the mathematical weight of it all, there was something more intangible that kept shaping his decisions. A belief that the platform couldn't grow unless the people who used it felt heard. He talked to creators constantly, listening to their fears about demonetization, community safety, and the unpredictable swings that could destroy their income overnight. Some creators were kids barely out of school, others were parents supporting families. Each conversation turned the platform into something human, something worth protecting. It grounded him in a way that no spreadsheet ever could. At the same time, he faced pressure from the other side. Huge brands with enormous advertising budgets, each demanding rules, structure, and some guarantee that their reputation wouldn't be destroyed by a single unpredictable video. To them, YouTube wasn't a creative playground. It was a risk. Neal understood their concerns, but he also knew that the soul of YouTube came from the very wildness that scared advertisers. The challenge wasn't to tame the platform, it was to balance it, to make it safe without suffocating it, to make it profitable without killing the creativity that made it worth visiting in the first place. Those were the years when the platform grew faster than anyone could comfortably keep up with. Every week brought new trends, new genres, new creators from corners of the world almost no one at the office expected. Beauty gurus turned their bedrooms into global studios. Gamers built empires from their laptops. Teenagers discovered that a single DIY video could launch a career. Behind the scenes, Neal watched it all unfold with a steady fascination, as though he were witnessing the birth of a new kind of economy, one driven not by corporations, but by individuals who were learning in real time that their stories mattered. Yet, the growth came with shadows too. As the platform expanded, so did the challenges. Harmful content surfaced faster than moderation tools could catch it. Misuse of the platform spread in ways that no one predicted. Every time a crisis hit the news, every time the words YouTube controversy appeared in headlines, Neal felt the weight settle onto his shoulders before anyone even called him. The world didn't always understand how complicated the system was behind the scenes, how many human decisions and technical limits collided at once. But he understood the responsibility, and he carried it quietly, without theatrics, without speeches, just steady work, day by day, choice by choice. There were nights he stayed long after the offices had emptied, walking down the quiet hallways with only the hum of servers and the glow of half-asleep monitors around him. He would stand by the large windows overlooking the city lights and wonder how a simple idea, a place to share videos, had grown into something that shaped culture, media, and conversations around the world. He wasn't the kind of leader who sought the spotlight. He rarely put himself forward as the public face of anything. Instead, he worked from the background, shaping policies, designing systems, building teams that would help guide the platform through uncharted territory. His influence wasn't loud. It was structural. Through all of this, his guiding principle remained surprisingly simple: Creators first. If they could thrive, YouTube could thrive. If they lost trust, the entire ecosystem would crumble. That belief drove many of the decisions that would define the platform for the next decade. Whether he was creating new ad formats, refining monetization rules, or rethinking how recommendations worked, he kept returning to the same question. Is this going to help the people who make YouTube what it is? That question became his compass, even when the path ahead felt uncertain. But Neal also knew something else. Creators weren't the only ones who needed structure. Viewers needed protection. Advertisers needed consistency. The company needed to remain sustainable. Balancing all of those needs was like walking a tightrope in shifting wind. One wrong step could create ripple effects across millions of lives. He learned to make decisions slowly, thoughtfully, resisting the pressure to simply react. In a world increasingly driven by speed and outrage, he tried to remain steady. And even as the platform grew more complex, he tried to preserve something essential in its identity, the sense that anyone, from anywhere, could upload a video and have a chance to be seen. That idea mattered to him deeply. It wasn't just a tagline. It was the heart of the platform he had helped shape since its earliest years. Every time he watched a small creator break through, every time he saw an unexpected voice rise above the noise, he felt a quiet affirmation that the work, however exhausting or complicated, was worth it. These were the years that hardened him, sharpened him, and taught him how to lead without ego. But they also planted seeds of something else, an understanding that YouTube wasn't just a platform. It was a living, evolving world, one that required constant attention, constant adjustment, constant empathy. Neal took all of this into himself, storing each lesson like a craftsman gathering tools. He didn't know what challenges were coming next, but he understood that whatever they were, they would require everything he had learned so far. And as the platform continued to expand, surprising him, challenging him, inspiring him, Neal began stepping into a role that would soon reshape not only his own life, but the entire direction of YouTube itself. He didn't announce it. He didn't prepare a speech. He simply began taking on more responsibility, more decisions, more of the invisible work that kept the platform alive. The world outside didn't notice it happening, not yet. But within the walls of YouTube, a quiet shift was beginning. The years that followed felt like watching a storm gather on the horizon. Slow at first, almost invisible, and then suddenly undeniable. YouTube was no longer just growing. It was accelerating, expanding into something far larger than anyone could have predicted. Every day brought new challenges, new expectations, and new eyes watching every decision the platform made. For Neal Mohan, this was the moment when the job transformed from demanding to monumental. The platform had become a cultural force, and with that came scrutiny from governments, parents, educators, advertisers, journalists, everyone with a stake in the digital future. The pressure didn't arrive in a single moment. It crept in gradually, building around him like rising water, testing the foundation of everything he had helped build. Inside the company, the atmosphere shifted. Hallway conversations grew more serious. Meetings grew longer, filled with questions no one had ever needed to ask before. How do you manage billions of daily views without losing sight of the people behind them? How do you protect children on a platform as vast as a global city? How do you preserve creative freedom while preventing harm? These weren't technical issues. They were moral ones, shaping the character of the digital world itself. Neal found himself at the center of these discussions, not because he demanded leadership, but because people naturally looked to him when the path ahead blurred. His calmness under pressure became a kind of anchor in the storm. He had a way of listening that made people feel grounded. Engineers would bring him nightmares about scaling systems faster than they were designed to grow. Policy teams would arrive with urgent questions about misinformation, harassment, and the rising tide of content that sat at the edge of the platform's rules. Creators would plead for stability, transparency, and a sense of fairness in a system that often felt unpredictable. Through it all, Neal absorbed every concern, every fear, every possibility. He rarely rushed to judgment. Instead, he allowed the full weight of the issue to settle before deciding how to respond. That patience became one of his defining traits, an unexpected strength, in an environment where everything moved at unprecedented speed. There were stretches when the pressure felt almost physical. The news cycle became an unpredictable force, turning niche controversies into global crises overnight. A single video could create backlash, spark political debates, or trigger advertiser panic. These weren't just abstract headlines, they were problems that landed directly on Neal's desk, demanding answers faster than seemed possible. He learned to make decisions in layers, short-term solutions to stop the bleeding, long-term strategies to address the underlying fractures, and future-oriented changes to prevent the same issue from happening again. It was delicate work, the kind that required both precision and intuition. But even amid the chaos, Neal never allowed himself to drift from the platform's core purpose. He believed deeply in the idea that YouTube could give ordinary people extraordinary power. In moments of doubt, he would watch creators whose voices would have been lost in earlier generations, artists breaking conventions, journalists documenting real-time events, teachers reaching students millions of miles away. These weren't just videos to him. They were examples of a new kind of storytelling, a new kind of education, a new kind of global conversation. They reminded him why the platform mattered, why it was worth protecting even when it felt impossibly difficult. Still, the challenges kept intensifying. Governments began asking for accountability. Regulatory bodies demanded answers about data, safety, and the impact of digital platforms on society. Neal found himself in meeting rooms far from YouTube's cheerful, creative spaces, rooms with long tables, stern faces, and questions designed to probe weaknesses. These encounters forced him to articulate the platform's values with more clarity and confidence than ever before. It wasn't enough to believe in YouTube's mission. He had to defend it. He had to explain how a global platform could remain open, creative, and free without becoming vulnerable to misuse. In quiet moments, he'd reflect on how strange this journey had become. Years earlier, he had joined Google thinking about strategy, analytics, and product design. Now he was dealing with geopolitics, social responsibility, and global communication norms. The world had shifted around him so quickly that he sometimes needed to pause and remember how it all began, a simple platform for sharing videos, now transformed into a pillar of the digital age. There was something surreal about that transformation, yet he never allowed awe to distract him from the responsibility. Inside the company, people began to recognize that Neal wasn't just solving problems, he was shaping the culture of leadership itself. His manner of decision-making became a quiet example for others, thoughtful, measured, focused not on headlines, but on long-term stability. He encouraged teams to think beyond short-term metrics and consider the humans behind every statistic. When engineers worried only about speed, he asked them about fairness. When policy teams focused on risk, he reminded them of opportunity. When business teams focused on revenue, he brought creators back into the center of the discussion. His leadership was gentle but precise, subtle but firm. And then came the projects that tested his capacity to balance innovation with responsibility. New features, new recommendation systems, new ad formats. Each carried enormous implications for the future of the platform. Some promised growth, others promised safety, but each came with consequences that spread across millions of lives. Neal oversaw these developments with the awareness that one small adjustment could change the way people consumed information worldwide. It was a level of influence he never bragged about, but one he took seriously. The world didn't need louder leaders, it needed careful ones. During these years, he spent countless hours walking through office hallways after midnight, watching teams refine systems that would determine what billions of people saw the next morning. He admired the engineers who lost sleep over details most viewers never noticed. He admired the trust and safety teams who faced the darkest corners of the internet to protect ordinary users. He admired the creators who continued uploading despite unpredictable challenges, turning passion into livelihood. And in all of them, he saw pieces of the platform's identity, a constantly evolving, constantly demanding ecosystem that refused to stand still. Gradually, a realization began forming around him, quietly at first. The platform needed a leader who understood all of this, not from a distance, but from the inside. Someone who had seen the platform's potential and its dangers. Someone who had built its systems, shaped its policies, and understood its cultural significance. Someone who had earned the trust of the creators and the confidence of the company. And someone who wasn't seeking personal spotlight, but who carried the mission like a responsibility rather than a badge. It wasn't a conversation spoken aloud in a single moment. It was sensed in the air, visible in how people turned toward him in crisis, how they leaned on his judgment, how they talked about the platform's future with him in mind. Neal didn't acknowledge it yet. He didn't even let himself think about it too deeply, but the truth was becoming clear. He wasn't just guiding YouTube systems anymore. He was quietly preparing to guide YouTube itself. There came a period when the pace of change inside YouTube felt less like a steady evolution and more like standing on shifting ground. The platform had grown so enormous, so deeply woven into people's daily lives, that every new challenge felt like a test of its structural integrity. And at the center of all the tension, all the urgency, all the unseen battles behind the scenes, Neal Mohan found himself stepping deeper into a role he hadn't asked for, but had slowly grown into. Responsibility wrapped around him like a second skin, quiet, heavy, and constant. He wasn't simply guiding teams or shaping products anymore. He was carrying the emotional weight of the entire ecosystem, the creators who depended on it, the viewers who relied on it, and the company that needed stability in an increasingly unpredictable world. Some days began before sunrise, when the office still felt like the quiet backstage of a theater before the curtains rose. He would walk past rows of empty desks, their screens faintly glowing with unfinished dashboards and lines of code left frozen mid-thought. Those early hours gave him space to think, to let ideas surface without interruption. He would read messages from creators in distant time zones, each expressing a different piece of the platform's heart: excitement, confusion, frustration, hope. He treated every message as a reminder that YouTube wasn't just a product. It was an enormous, living community, one that demanded attention not only through analysis and strategy, but through empathy. By the time morning light filled the meeting rooms, the day's intensity would begin. Discussions with engineering teams often spiraled into deep technical territory. Questions about how recommendations should behave, how search should evolve, how to keep the system both powerful and fair. Neal listened the way someone listens to a complicated piece of music, attuned to every detail, but always aware of the broader rhythm. He never let the conversation stay too narrow. He would gently ask how a change might affect smaller creators, or viewers discovering new passions, or communities that relied on YouTube for connection. His quiet interjections often reshaped entire projects, guiding them toward outcomes that preserved humanity inside the technology. Other meetings carried a different tone, those with trust and safety teams, where the conversations became heavier, sometimes emotionally draining. This was where the Internet's darkest challenges revealed themselves: harmful content, deceptive narratives, predatory behaviors, exploitation of loopholes. Teams would present the latest trends, emerging threats, and the growing sophistication of bad actors. There was no sense of glamour in this room, no celebration of innovation. It was the part of the job that few outsiders ever saw, the part that required extraordinary mental resilience. Neal listened with the same patience he reserved for every team, but his expression often grew still, reflecting the seriousness of the decisions in front of him. Every policy shift, every enforcement tool, every protective mechanism had consequences that touched millions of people. He carried the weight of these conversations with a calm exterior, but internally he felt the pressure accumulating, layer by layer, moment by moment. He was not a person who sought drama or spectacle. He preferred clarity, structure, thoughtful process. Yet the world rarely offered him those luxuries. Instead, it sent waves of unexpected crises, a sudden backlash, an investigative story, a global event that thrust the platform into the center of discussion. He learned to navigate these storms with a steady compass, not because the path was clear, but because losing stability would only make things worse. His strength wasn't loudness, it was consistency. There were late evenings when he would stay long after most people left, walking through the dimly lit offices where only a few screens remained illuminated by tired engineers polishing code for deployment. He admired their commitment, but he also felt a sense of responsibility for it. The culture he helped shape, where people worked, not out of obligation but because they believed in the platform, was something he treated with care. He encouraged healthy boundaries, reminded teams to rest, and emphasized clarity whenever complexity threatened to overwhelm them. His leadership wasn't about intensity. It was about endurance and the ability to make people feel safe, even when the environment was turbulent. Meanwhile, YouTube's cultural influence continued expanding faster than anyone could fully comprehend. New genres emerged overnight. New creators rose from obscurity to global visibility, and audiences developed expectations that weren't just high. They were evolving constantly. Neal spent countless hours studying these shifts, not through spreadsheets or quarterly reports, but by watching videos, reading comment sections, and observing how people interacted with the platform in real time. He believed the best way to guide YouTube was to stay as close as possible to the people who made it meaningful. He knew that behind every upload was a story, a dream, a risk taken. He never let himself forget that. But with growth came complexities that stretched far beyond what traditional leadership roles prepared him for. Advertisers increased their scrutiny, wanting assurance that their brands appeared next to safe, positive content. Creators demanded transparency and stability, pushing for systems that treated them fairly. Viewers expected both freedom and protection, often without recognizing the tension between the two. Governments issued warnings, requests, and regulations, sometimes reasonable, sometimes not. Journalists probed for weaknesses. Activists demanded accountability. Every group wanted something different, and many of their needs conflicted. Balancing all of that required a level of neutrality that wasn't passive, but intentional. Neal had to see the full spectrum of human behavior reflected in the platform, its creativity, its chaos, its kindness, its volatility, and create systems that could hold all of it without collapsing. He understood something that only a handful of leaders in Silicon Valley ever truly grasped. Running a global platform wasn't about control, it was about equilibrium, about designing structures strong enough to bend without breaking. During this period, people inside the company began noticing something subtle about Neal's presence. Whenever tensions ran high, he had a way of lowering the temperature in the room simply by entering it. He didn't dominate discussions. He didn't interrupt. He sat patiently, hands folded, eyes steady. And when he finally spoke, he spoke slowly, clearly, sometimes pausing to weigh his words. It wasn't theatrical. It was genuine focus. His voice carried a rare steadiness, a sense that no matter how chaotic the situation seemed, a solution was possible. That sense of grounded leadership earned him deep respect. In crisis after crisis, people looked to him not because he demanded authority, but because he embodied it. And quietly, almost imperceptibly, responsibility began shifting toward him in ways that signaled something larger was coming. Executives asked for his judgment more frequently. Teams waited for his direction before finalizing important changes. The platform's future strategy leaned increasingly on his vision. He wasn't just one of the leaders anymore. He was becoming the person who could hold the entire ecosystem in balance. There were moments when he felt the shift, but didn't name it. He sensed the widening gap between what he was expected to do and the formal title he held. He sensed the company's growing reliance on his instincts. He sensed the platform's need for a steady hand, one that understood its history, its complexities, and its potential better than anyone else. But he didn't rush toward anything. He didn't campaign for bigger roles. He didn't chase recognition. He simply continued doing the work with the same quiet commitment he had carried since the beginning. And somewhere in the subtle rhythm of those long days, between the early morning reflections and the late-night walks through empty hallways, a new chapter of his journey began rising quietly, like a tide that couldn't be stopped. He didn't know it yet, but YouTube was slowly preparing to place its future directly in his hands. There came a moment when the rhythm of Neal Mohan's days began to shift in a way he couldn't fully explain. It wasn't dramatic or announced, not the kind of change that arrives with clear signs or bold declarations. Instead, it unfolded in small, almost imperceptible ways, through the tone of certain conversations, the kinds of questions he was suddenly being asked, and the subtle way responsibilities began rearranging themselves around him. What once felt like collaboration started to feel more like stewardship. What once felt like shared weight began tilting toward his side of the scale. He didn't resist it. He didn't rush toward it either. He simply noticed it quietly, like a person becoming aware of a distant sound growing closer. The leadership team had always trusted him, but now their trust carried a different texture. Decisions that once required long discussions became shorter when he spoke. People listened more intently, taking notes with a seriousness that suggested his perspective had become more than just one voice in the room. It wasn't ego that made him aware of this shift. It was responsibility. He felt the heightened stakes behind every choice that reached his desk. These were no longer isolated decisions. They were structural ones, affecting entire communities across the world. And as the platform continued expanding, the emotional and cultural weight of those decisions grew heavier. There were days when he walked into meetings, knowing the room was waiting for him to set the direction. He could feel the unspoken expectation, the sense that he carried a clarity others needed. It wasn't that people lacked ideas or expertise. It was that he had developed an instinct for YouTube's ecosystem so nuanced, so deeply informed by years of watching its evolution, that his guidance had become almost like the platform's internal compass. Engineers looked to him for the North Star of product design. Policy teams waited for his intuition whenever the landscape grew murky. Creator teams trusted him to understand not only the technical mechanics of the platform, but the emotional ones too. This shift didn't happen overnight. It happened in the quiet accumulation of thousands of moments, conversations, insights, decisions, setbacks, and revelations. Each one added a new layer to the understanding he carried. And though he never said it aloud, there were nights when he sat alone in his office, the city lights flickering against the windows, and wondered whether the responsibility would continue growing until it reached a point where something fundamental had to change. Meanwhile, the platform itself was entering a more complicated era, not chaotic in the way earlier years had been, but more intricate, as if the threads connecting everything had grown tighter and more fragile. Creators were now global stars. Viewers were consuming more content than ever. Short-form videos were accelerating faster than anyone predicted. Artificial intelligence was beginning to rewrite the rules of creativity. And the world was watching YouTube not just as a source of entertainment, but as one of the most influential cultural forces on Earth. This meant every part of the platform required attention. Algorithm updates had to be tuned with extraordinary precision. Policy decisions required empathy, balanced with firmness. Product development demanded a vision that could anticipate not only what people wanted today, but where the Internet itself was heading. Neal found himself weaving these threads together constantly. He spent hours connecting dots that others hadn't yet seen. How a small tweak in recommendations might affect watch patterns 6 months later. How a shift in creator incentives might shape the platform's culture. How the rise of new formats might redefine what it meant to be a creator. He never underestimated the power of those decisions. He understood that one adjustment could make someone's career take off, while another could unintentionally stifle the momentum of thousands. That awareness kept him grounded. It prevented him from making rash choices. It reminded him that YouTube wasn't just code and infrastructure. It was people, dreams, risks, and livelihoods. The weight of that kept him up some nights, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, playing out different scenarios in his mind. He didn't see this as stress. He saw it as duty. A duty he didn't ask for, but accepted because he knew the platform needed someone who wouldn't take shortcuts. Someone who would make decisions slowly, carefully, and humanely. His approach wasn't revolutionary. It was steady. It was deliberate. And sometimes steady leadership is exactly what a massive ecosystem needs to survive its most complex years. At the same time, he was building relationships across the company that would prove essential later. He met with teams far outside his domain, people working on analytics tools, monetization features, accessibility improvements, mobile interfaces, and community guidelines. He believed that leadership couldn't exist inside a bubble. Understanding the platform required understanding the people shaping it at every level. He made time for these conversations, even when his schedule was packed so tightly that assistants worried he'd burn out. But he didn't see these meetings as burdens. They were investments. Each one gave him insight into how the platform truly worked from the inside out. And yet, beneath all this growing responsibility, another shift was happening in the background, quieter, more personal, harder for him to articulate. It was the realization that he was no longer simply supporting YouTube's direction. He was becoming the person expected to define it. That realization didn't arrive through a dramatic announcement or a sudden revelation. It came through the way people reacted to his presence, the way teams prepared extra carefully whenever he visited, the way executives turned to him during high-pressure decisions. But perhaps the clearest sign of all came during a leadership off-site, an annual gathering where the most senior voices discussed the future of Google's products. People presented on search advancements, cloud services, hardware roadmaps, and emerging innovations. When Neal stepped up to speak about YouTube, something changed in the atmosphere. The room grew still in a way that caught even him off guard. People weren't just listening. They were waiting, expectant, almost reliant on him to outline the path forward. And he did calmly and confidently, delivering a vision that balanced ambition with reality. By the time he finished, he sensed something had shifted. It wasn't applause that told him, it was the silence. The kind of silence that follows clarity. After that off-site, the conversations became even more pointed. Executives began involving him earlier in strategic decisions. Teams asked whether they could align their projects with the direction he outlined. His sense of ownership deepened, not because he claimed it, but because others recognized it in him. Still, he kept his focus on the work. He didn't assume anything. He didn't let ego cloud his judgment. He remained steady. Meanwhile, the world outside YouTube continued changing faster than anyone predicted. Global events, cultural shifts, economic turbulence, every factor seemed to push the platform into the spotlight again and again. And each time it did, Neal found himself navigating another wave of demands, expectations, and scrutiny. It felt as if the environment was preparing him for something larger, testing his endurance, sharpening his instincts. He didn't know when the moment would arrive, but he sensed the direction everything was moving. And as he stepped deeper into this evolving chapter, balancing expanding responsibilities, intensifying pressures, and the quiet acknowledgement from those around him, a new understanding began forming in his mind. The years that followed would test Neal Mohan in ways he could never fully anticipate, shaping him not only as an executive, but as someone responsible for guiding the digital world through a period of rapid, unpredictable transformation. As YouTube entered its second major evolution, moving from a website to a global ecosystem, Neal found himself standing at the center of competing realities, the excitement of boundless creation, and the responsibility of protecting millions of people who relied on the platform daily. It was a balancing act without a manual, and each decision would quietly ripple across cultures, industries, and generations. What kept him grounded during this turbulent period wasn't authority or power, but a steady internal compass. Neal had always believed that technology must serve people, not overshadow them, and he carried that belief through every hallway meeting, every late-night email, and every emergency gathering when something on the platform demanded immediate attention. The world increasingly saw YouTube as inevitable, but for Neal, the human core behind every view, every comment, every uploaded dream was what mattered most. And as soon as 2015 approached, it became clear that the next era of YouTube would demand even more from him. The first challenge was structural. YouTube was no longer just a place for videos. It was becoming a complex universe of creators, advertisers, engineers, viewers, musicians, educators, journalists, streamers, and more. Each group had its own needs, its own concerns, and sometimes its own fears. Neal often described this evolution as building a city while millions of people are already living inside it. The infrastructure had to scale, the rules had to adapt, the culture had to hold together under pressure, and the mayor, if one could call him that, would have to negotiate peace between all corners of the growing digital metropolis. Internally, teams were expanding across continents. Engineering centers multiplied. Support centers grew. YouTube's presence at global events, from VidCon to SXSW, signaled how deeply creators were shaping modern culture. Yet, with the explosion of content, came the rise of new complexities, copyright battles, misinformation concerns, emerging political landscapes, and the fundamental question of who should decide what could or could not exist online. Neal approached each issue not as a politician or a marketer, but as an architect of responsible growth, someone who understood that the platform's future depended on clarity, fairness, and sustainable decision-making. He often spent evenings in conference rooms reviewing product proposals, asking questions that forced teams to consider long-term consequences instead of short-term wins. Should creators receive more transparency over their analytics? Should advertisers know more about where their ads appeared? Should viewers have more control over recommendations? Should artists be paid differently? Should new forms of content get dedicated features? These weren't simple yes or no decisions. Each one shaped a part of the ecosystem. But what set Neal apart was his ability to see how small changes could influence the platform 15 steps ahead, the same strategic intuition that once caught the attention of Google's leadership years earlier. And yet, the period also demanded emotional strength. As YouTube's influence grew, criticism became louder. Advocates pushed for more creator protections, regulators pushed for more oversight, journalists pushed for more transparency. Every headline seemed to examine the platform with a magnifying glass. But while others felt overwhelmed by the noise, Neal developed a quiet resilience. Each critique, each challenge, each unexpected crisis became something to learn from, not avoid or deny. He recognized that YouTube wasn't simply a tech product. It was a living organism shaped by the world's collective creativity, and anything that alive was bound to grow with friction. His work extended beyond corporate walls. Neal spent countless hours meeting creators, listening to their frustrations, understanding their workflows, learning how they built communities from scratch. He watched as young filmmakers turned bedrooms into studios, as educators built entire free universities online, as musicians used YouTube as a global stage, and as everyday people found their voice for the first time. Those moments fueled him more than quarterly metrics ever could. They reminded him that behind every algorithmic improvement, every policy update, every design decision, there were human beings building something meaningful. Around this time, YouTube also became deeply interwoven with global culture. Viral challenges swept across continents. New creators emerged who would later define industries. Long-form commentary evolved into a genre. Live streaming gained momentum. Music on YouTube began charting in the real world. The line between digital and physical entertainment started to blur. And through these changes, Neal carried the responsibility of ensuring the ecosystem remained open, accessible, and sustainable, not just for the present generation, but for those who hadn't yet uploaded their first video. Privately, he felt the weight of the platform's scale. Mistakes could no longer be small, they echoed. Innovations could no longer be simple. They had to account for billions of users. Yet instead of being overwhelmed, Neal found a strange calm in the complexity. He treated the platform like an evolving landscape, something to observe carefully, improve patiently, and guide with steady hands. His leadership style became almost meditative. Listen first, understand deeply, then act decisively. As YouTube moved toward the new territories, gaming, live content, subscription products, improved mobile experiences, Neal's influence became unmistakable. He didn't seek the spotlight, but his fingerprints quietly shaped the platform's transformation. The next chapter of YouTube's story would carry his signature, not in bold lettering, but in the thoughtful structure that kept the platform growing without losing its soul. And just as the next wave of innovations began to take form, a bigger question emerged across YouTube's internal walls, one that would soon push Neal onto a path he never expected to take. A path that would elevate him from strategist and architect to something far greater. A path toward leadership that no one, not even Neal himself, could have predicted. By the time Neal Mohan stepped into the next era of his journey at YouTube, the platform had grown into something almost mythic. A digital ocean where billions of voices converged, collided, and often found harmony in ways no one could have predicted. The world no longer saw YouTube as a simple site where people uploaded videos. It had become a cornerstone of global culture, a place where ideas traveled faster than television signals, where unknown creators could rise overnight, where movements could ignite with a single upload. And at the center of this expanding universe, quietly shaping its future, stood Neal. What defined this period wasn't explosive innovation or dramatic upheaval. It was the slow, deliberate process of reshaping YouTube from the inside out. Neal often described it as the refinement stage, a time when the platform needed less building and more sculpting. The foundations were strong. The user base was massive. The creator community was thriving. But the world was changing faster than anyone expected, and YouTube had to adjust not through bold leaps, but through precise recalibration. In many ways, this required more discipline, more patience, and more vision than the earlier years. During this stage, Neal spent more time listening than talking. He listened to engineers who wrestled with scaling challenges that grew larger with every new country YouTube expanded into. He listened to policy teams navigating the delicate intersection between free expression and user safety. He listened to creators who were learning to navigate a platform that could make their careers one month and challenge their livelihoods the next. And he listened to viewers, ordinary people around the world whose daily routines now included watching videos for learning, comfort, entertainment, or the simple joy of connection. This was the period when YouTube's identity became something the world debated openly. Was it a media company, a tech company, a social platform, an educational resource, a public square? Neal's response was always the same. YouTube is an ecosystem, and ecosystems evolve. That philosophy became the backbone of his approach. It allowed him to view problems not as isolated issues, but as symptoms of a system constantly shifting under pressure. He wanted to protect the spontaneity of creation without letting chaos take root. He wanted to maintain freedom without sacrificing responsibility. And above all, he wanted YouTube to remain a place where humanity could express itself without fear. Amid all this, there was a quiet transformation happening behind the scenes. Neal was becoming something more than a product leader. His influence, his steadiness, and his ability to connect dots across engineering, policy, creator culture, and global trends began drawing attention from Google and Alphabet's leadership. He had a rare skill, one that was becoming more valuable each year, the ability to see the platform not as a machine, but as a living system. Where others saw charts and metrics, he saw relationships and consequences. Where others saw problems, he saw the invisible patterns underneath them. Inside YouTube headquarters, people began referring to him as the bridge because he could connect departments that rarely understood each other. Engineers trusted him because he respected technical constraints. Creators trusted him because he valued their craft. Executives trusted him because he thought strategically, and teams trusted him because he made them feel heard. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Neal became the gravitational center of YouTube's long-term vision. Yet, during these years, Neal also faced some of the most difficult moments of his career. Global politics began intersecting with digital platforms in ways no one anticipated. Debates over misinformation intensified. Cultural clashes found new battlegrounds online. Nations demanded new regulations. Journalists scrutinized content moderation deeply, and creators, empowered by the internet, but vulnerable to algorithms they didn't always understand, demanded more transparency. Through each wave, Neal remained calm, not detached, but steady. He believed that platforms as large as YouTube had a responsibility to engage with the world's complexities, not retreat from them. Many nights he found himself sitting in conference rooms long after the sun had set over San Bruno or Mountain View. The office hallways would grow quiet, lights dimmed, and only the soft hum of air conditioning remained. It was during these late hours that Neal did his deepest thinking. He reviewed proposals, contemplated policy implications, and reflected on YouTube's place in the world. Was the platform doing enough to support creators mentally and financially? Were families safe when children watched videos? Was YouTube still a positive force for global culture? Those were the questions that haunted him, not because of pressure from executives, but because he genuinely cared. The world around YouTube shifted rapidly. Mobile consumption exploded. Short-form content emerged as a new competitive frontier. Streaming services multiplied. Social platforms rose and fell. And through it all, YouTube stood resilient. But resilience wasn't automatic. It was something Neal worked tirelessly to maintain. He pushed to future-proof the platform, to ensure that innovation didn't overshadow stability, that growth didn't compromise community, and that creators remained at the heart of everything. And then something unexpected began happening. Neal, who had always worked behind the curtain, started appearing more frequently in public conversations, interviews, creator events, internal town halls. People were beginning to see what YouTube employees had long known. He wasn't just an executive, he was a steward of the platform. Someone who understood its past, but more importantly, someone who could guide its future with clarity and compassion. What Neal didn't yet realize was that every step he took during this period, every decision he made, every challenge he navigated, was quietly preparing him for a role that would soon reshape his life and the trajectory of YouTube forever. A moment was coming, a moment of transition, uncertainty, and opportunity. A moment that would require not the strategist, not the builder, but the leader Neal had slowly become without ever trying to claim the title. As Neal Mohan moved deeper into this pivotal chapter of his career, he found himself navigating a landscape where every decision carried more weight than the last. YouTube had grown far beyond a platform capable of being managed through simple adjustments or feature updates. Now, every choice resonated across continents, touching creators who uploaded from their kitchens, influencing classrooms where students learned algebra through videos, reaching rural villages where YouTube had become the window to the rest of the world. And Neal felt that weight, not as a burden, but as a responsibility that required patience, steadiness, and clarity. During this time, a new tension began to form, not one born from crisis, but from evolution. The digital world was tilting into a new era where attention was the most valuable currency. Short-form video was rising with explosive speed. New platforms were redefining how young audiences consumed content. Creators who once relied on long-form storytelling suddenly found themselves competing with fast, immediate bursts of entertainment. It wasn't a threat, it was a shift. And Neal understood that to protect the ecosystem, YouTube had to move with the world, not resist it. Behind closed doors, YouTube's leadership entered months of quiet experimentation. Teams across continents ran prototypes, tested interfaces, and studied behavioral patterns. The question wasn't simply how to compete, but how to innovate without compromising the heart of YouTube: diversity of content, depth of storytelling, and creator sustainability. Neal chaired countless meetings where voices from different corners of the company debated passionately. Some argued for aggressive moves into short form. Others warned that diluting traditional YouTube could destabilize the creator economy. Neal listened to all of them, absorbing different angles with the same thoughtfulness that defined his leadership. It was during one of these early strategy sessions that a concept began to crystallize, something that would later become YouTube Shorts. What excited Neal wasn't just the opportunity to meet evolving trends, it was the chance to expand YouTube's creative canvas. Short form, in his view, didn't replace depth. It added another dimension to expression. He believed creators should have more ways to tell stories, not fewer. And as that idea took shape, so did an internal shift. For the first time, teams felt aligned around a single vision that embraced both future innovation and the platform's core identity. But the challenges didn't stop with content formats. YouTube's growth brought new complexities in global regulation. Countries demanded stricter compliance. Cultural differences made policy enforcement inconsistently interpreted. Legal frameworks shifted faster than platforms could adapt. And through this maze of global requirements, Neal found himself at the center of some of the toughest conversations in tech. Diplomacy became as important as engineering. Context became as vital as compliance. Neal approached each new challenge not with defensiveness, but with openness, believing that trust was built through transparency, not force. Behind the scenes, Neal often met with creator groups privately. These conversations were raw and honest. Creators shared their fears about demonetization, their frustration with unpredictable algorithms, their stress about building careers on a platform that was constantly changing. Neal listened deeply, often filling notebooks with scribbled ideas, pain points, and potential solutions. To him, creators weren't users or partners, they were storytellers whose trust was essential to YouTube's soul. He believed that if creators lost faith, the platform lost its purpose. His ability to empathize without promising unrealistic outcomes created a rare kind of respect. Even when creators disagreed with certain policies, they trusted that Neal understood their struggles. That empathy became a quiet anchor for YouTube, during moments when public pressure spiked and trust wavered. Neal was the calm voice reminding teams that behind every metric was a human being trying to build something meaningful. And yet, in the middle of all these heavy responsibilities, Neal still carved out space for long-term thinking. While the world debated today's content issues, Neal's mind drifted toward questions that stretched years into the future. How could YouTube empower the next generation of educators? What tools would future filmmakers need to thrive? Could creators build sustainable careers beyond ad revenue alone? Could YouTube become a platform that helped uplift voices from developing nations, giving them access to audiences they could never reach before? These weren't abstract questions. They were the seeds of strategies that would later shape the blueprint of YouTube's evolution. One evening, after a particularly long day of cross-continental meetings, Neal paused outside the YouTube headquarters. The building was quiet, its bright red play button logo glowing softly in the California night. He thought about how far the company had come, from a tiny startup founded in a garage to a global cultural force. And he thought about the role he now played in shepherding that legacy forward. It wasn't ambition that kept him awake late into the night. It was the sense that the platform's next chapter mattered more than anything they had built before. This was the period when others began to see Neal differently. Executives noticed his steady, strategic presence. Teams saw how he could transform tension into collaboration. Creators felt the sincerity behind his decisions, and the board recognized that his understanding of YouTube wasn't purely analytical. It was intuitive, almost instinctual. He wasn't simply working at YouTube. He was becoming YouTube's heartbeat. What Neal didn't yet know was that this rising recognition was leading toward a moment of transition, one that would reshape his future and the platform's destiny. The groundwork had been laid quietly, almost invisibly through years of consistency, compassion, and conviction. And soon the world would witness the result of everything Neal had prepared for, even if he never sought the spotlight himself. By the time Neal Mohan stepped into the next phase of his journey, the digital world around him was undergoing one of its most dramatic evolutions yet. It wasn't a single shift or a sudden disruption. It was a slow, sweeping transformation that touched every corner of the internet. People weren't just consuming content anymore. They were living inside it. They woke up with creators, learned from educators thousands of miles away, discovered new music through recommendation algorithms, and built communities around shared passions that would have been impossible in any era before this one. YouTube wasn't just a website. It was a global ecosystem, a digital heartbeat pulsing through billions of devices. And Neal, with his quiet determination and patient vision, found himself increasingly at the center of shaping this new world. Inside YouTube's headquarters, conversations had started to shift. The question was no longer how to keep the platform running. It was how to responsibly carry its unprecedented influence. Engineers debated ethical AI. Policy teams studied misinformation patterns across different regions. Creator partnership leads tried to find ways to support the rapidly expanding creator economy, which was now large enough to resemble a global industry of its own. In nearly every discussion, Neal's voice was the one gently redirecting the room toward clarity, reminding them to think long-term, reminding them that YouTube's greatest strength wasn't scale, it was trust. This was also a time when the creator landscape began to fracture into dozens of new paths. Some creators built massive brands, turning their channels into full-blown companies. Others specialized deeply, focusing on niches like woodworking, miniature painting, astrophysics, or farm life. A new generation of creators blended entertainment with education, making complex subjects feel accessible to anyone. Neal watched this evolution with a mix of admiration and responsibility. The creativity amazed him, but the pressure these creators faced worried him even more. Sudden fame, unstable incomes, unpredictable algorithms. These were stresses that didn't exist a decade earlier, yet creators now faced them daily. And they often faced them alone. Privately, Neal began pushing for initiatives that would give creators more stability. He believed strongly that YouTube should offer not just tools for uploading videos, but tools for building careers. He wanted monetization systems that rewarded consistency, not virality. He wanted analytics that empowered creators instead of intimidating them. He wanted resources that supported mental health, financial planning, and long-term sustainability. And though many of these ideas would take years to develop, the seeds were planted now, quietly, intentionally, with long-term creator well-being in mind. At the same time, global events were altering how information flowed. In different parts of the world, crises erupted, natural disasters, political instability, social movements, economic downturns. People turned to YouTube in search of clarity, comfort, or simply connection. Live streams became gathering places. Personal vlogs became windows into experiences that mainstream news rarely captured. Through all of this, Neal felt the weight of YouTube's responsibility grow heavier. His team needed to ensure that the platform remained a force for good while also respecting the diversity of human expression. It was a delicate balance, one that involved listening more than speaking, learning more than assuming, and constantly adapting to a world that refused to stand still. Behind the scenes, Neal's days grew longer. Meetings spilled into late evenings. Messages from global teams pinged his phone at all hours. Yet he never seemed to lose his composure. He walked the halls with the same calm steadiness he'd always carried, the kind that grounded people around him. Colleagues often described him as someone who could slow down a room, bringing order to chaotic discussions through thoughtfulness rather than authority. And while the demands on him were enormous, he embraced them with a quiet sense of purpose, because he knew this chapter wasn't just about managing YouTube. It was about preparing it for a world that was evolving faster than anyone could predict. His role, once mostly behind the scenes, was growing larger in ways he hadn't expected. More teams sought his input. More creators looked to him for guidance. More external partners began recognizing him as a central figure in YouTube's future. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Neal began to sense that a shift was coming, one that would change not only how the company saw him, but how he saw himself. All the while, the foundation for that shift was being built, meeting by meeting, policy by policy, long night by long night. And though Neal had never sought the spotlight, the moment was drawing nearer when he would no longer be able to avoid it. As Neal Mohan entered the next stretch of his journey, the intensity of YouTube's evolution only continued to accelerate. The world outside was restless, shifting in ways that no company, no matter how large, could fully predict. New technologies emerged at a pace that seemed almost unreal. AI models grew more powerful, reshaping everything from how videos were recommended to how creators produce content. Virtual worlds, augmented reality layers, and decentralized platforms whispered promises of a future where digital and physical life blended seamlessly. For most people, this was overwhelming. For Neal, it was a landscape of opportunity, one that demanded discernment, caution, and imagination all at once. Inside the walls of YouTube's headquarters, teams from dozens of disciplines gathered to debate the company's future. Engineers explored how AI could help creators edit videos faster, translate content automatically, or personalize learning experiences for students. Ethics specialists cautioned that advanced AI required guardrails. Product designers argued for simplicity, reminding everyone that YouTube's magic came from being accessible to billions, not a select few. Every discussion was passionate. And yet, in the middle of this storm of progress, Neal's voice remained the consistent thread pulling ideas into focus. He didn't push for flashy innovation, but meaningful innovation. Tools that felt human, empathetic, and beneficial to creators and viewers alike. This was also a time when creators began expressing a deeper desire for connection. Many of them weren't just uploading videos, they were building communities that often felt more real than the ones in their daily lives. Creators spoke openly about the pressures of constant performance, about burnout, about the fear of losing relevance in an algorithm-driven world. Neal took these concerns seriously. He pushed teams to develop features that gave creators more control and more insight, not just more obligations. He wanted dashboards that explained algorithmic decisions more transparently. He wanted revenue tools that didn't punish experimentation or slower upload schedules. In short, he wanted a healthier ecosystem, one where creators could breathe. At the same time, YouTube was grappling with a quieter but equally important challenge: digital literacy. Across the globe, millions of new users were coming online for the first time, many in regions where traditional media was limited. YouTube became their primary access point to the world's information. This brought incredible opportunity, but also responsibility. In far-off regions, misinformation spread differently. Cultural nuance shaped what was considered harmful or acceptable. Local governments pushed for stricter laws, each with its own expectations. Neal navigated these complexities with an approach that combined firmness with respect. He believed that enforcing global standards required listening to local voices, not imposing a one-size-fits-all mindset. Meanwhile, inside the company, Neal's leadership style continued to evolve. He shifted from being the person who solved problems to being the person who shaped the systems that solved problems. He empowered teams, encouraged creativity, and championed thoughtful debate. He was known not for commanding authority, but for inspiring it. People trusted him because he made them feel heard. They respected him because he valued integrity over convenience. And gradually, this reputation began to extend beyond YouTube's offices. Tech industry leaders, journalists, and policy experts all began to recognize Neal as a key figure, someone whose perspective was shaping the future of online culture. But even as his influence grew, Neal remained grounded. He maintained the same routines, the same steady demeanor, the same thoughtful approach that had defined him since his earliest days in tech. He still took time to walk the halls and check in with teams personally. He still spoke with creators privately to hear their uncensored concerns. He still stepped into rooms where tensions ran high and found ways to soften them, not by force but by understanding. It was this quiet consistency that made people believe he wasn't just guiding YouTube, he was safeguarding it. During this period, a new wave of internal discussions began to surface. Private conversations among executives and board members about the future leadership of the company. It wasn't dramatic or political. It was practical. It was strategic. It was the recognition that YouTube needed a leader who understood not just the business, but the culture, the heartbeat of the platform. And more, those conversations circled back to one person, Neal Mohan. Neal didn't know the details yet. He didn't see the full picture forming, but he felt something shifting around him, like the air before a change in weather. Teams sought his guidance more urgently. Executives asked for his presence more frequently, and the weight he felt wasn't pressure. It was anticipation. A quiet part of him understood that he was moving toward a moment that would test everything he'd learned, everything he believed, and everything he hoped to build. The turning point in Neal Mohan's journey arrived not with fanfare, but with a subtle shift felt only by those who had spent years watching the inner workings of YouTube unfold. It began with a series of unusually quiet meetings, the kind where senior leaders spoke less and listened more. People exchanged glances in hallways, sensing that something significant was on the horizon, even if the details remained hidden. And through it all, Neal moved with his usual calm, unaware that the momentum of his entire career was carrying him toward a moment that would reshape not only his life, but the future of one of the most influential platforms in the world. It happened gradually, the way most life-changing moments do. First came small conversations, private check-ins with executives who wanted his thoughts on long-term strategy, product evolution, and the company's cultural direction. Then came invitations to discussions outside his usual domain. People wanted to understand how he viewed the world, not just how he viewed YouTube's systems. They asked about the future of the creator economy, the growing tension between safety and freedom of expression, and the role YouTube should play in global education. Neal spoke with the same measured clarity he always had, but these conversations felt different. They weren't just about refining policies. They were about inheriting responsibility. Behind closed doors, a realization had taken hold. YouTube needed a leader who could balance innovation with empathy, structure with creativity, and global scale with personal understanding. Someone who didn't just analyze data, but understood what it meant for the billions of lives shaped by it. Someone who approached challenges with patience rather than panic. Someone who believed that the future of online video wasn't about more content, but better content, safer, healthier, more meaningful. And time after time, the discussion circled back to Neal. Meanwhile, the world outside YouTube was becoming louder, more polarized, more unpredictable. Governments demanded clarity. Media outlets demanded accountability. Creators demanded fairness and transparency. Viewers demanded trust. It was an era defined not by calm growth, but by turbulence. And in that turbulence, the platform needed a steady hand. Some leaders chased the spotlight, hoping to steer public attention. Others stepped back, reluctant to take on the weight of such an influential role. But Neal did neither. He simply kept working, kept listening, kept guiding the company with the same grounded purpose that had become his signature. In the months leading up to the moment of change, Neal found himself navigating challenges that seemed to appear one after another. A new wave of AI-generated content raised questions about authenticity. Major creators began pushing for clearer insights into algorithmic behavior. In multiple countries, regulatory bodies were drafting new rules that would directly affect how YouTube operated. Each issue required delicate decisions, long nights of discussion, and the ability to see both the short-term risk and the long-term opportunity. Neal didn't shy away. If anything, he leaned deeper into the work, convinced that responsibility wasn't something to fear, it was something to honor. During this time, his influence on the company culture became unmistakable. Younger team members saw him as a mentor, someone who encouraged them to ask hard questions without fear. Veteran engineers appreciated his straightforwardness, his willingness to trust their expertise while guiding them with thoughtful questions. Policy teams admired the way he navigated complex ethical dilemmas without resorting to shortcuts. And creators, even those who had never met him, began to feel the quiet presence of a leader who genuinely cared about their well-being. His decisions were not quick fixes. They were investments in YouTube's long-term health. Then came a morning that felt strangely suspended in time. The sun rose over the Bay Area like any other day, casting a soft glow over the office buildings and the quiet streets below. Teams logged into their meetings, executives prepared their notes, and the rhythm of the company settled into its usual steady pulse. But for those who had been following the internal conversations, there was a quiet expectation in the air, as if everyone was waiting for a chapter to finally turn. That morning, Neal was called into a small, private meeting, one that would last only minutes, but would echo across years. He listened as the conversation unfolded, calm but fully present. He heard the words that would shift the trajectory of his career. He took a slow breath, steady as always, and in that moment something inside him settled, not in surprise, but in acceptance. Everything he had done, every decision, every late night, Every piece of insight he had offered had led him to this place, a place he had never actively sought but had quietly earned. The announcement would come soon. The world would hear it, and so would the millions of creators whose lives would be touched by it. But before that, there was a brief silent moment when only Neal knew what was coming, a moment of stillness before the weight of leadership fully arrived. The announcement itself, when it finally came, was delivered with understated precision, reflecting the very ethos Neal had cultivated throughout his career. There were no grand speeches, no public spectacle. Inside the YouTube offices, teams watched quietly, sensing the weight of the moment even before the words fully sank in. Neal Mohan had been named the new leader of YouTube. It was a decision that had been years in the making, shaped by countless late nights, countless conversations, and countless moments when he had quietly guided the platform through both calm and crisis. For Neal, the recognition was not a culmination, but the start of a new journey. The title mattered less than the responsibility it carried, the need to lead a platform with billions of users, millions of creators, and the eyes of the world upon it. Leadership, he knew, was not about authority, it was about stewardship. It was about maintaining the delicate balance between innovation and safety, growth and sustainability, global scale and human-centered design. He understood that every decision he made would ripple outward, shaping culture, technology, and the lives of people he would never meet. Immediately, the responsibilities multiplied. Neal found himself immersed in a rhythm where strategic decisions, content policies, creator relations, and regulatory negotiations blended into a continuous stream of work. Each day demanded clarity, empathy, and precision. He guided teams through new AI initiatives that would enhance creator tools while safeguarding against misinformation. He oversaw programs to expand YouTube's educational content globally. He monitored the evolving challenges of copyright and intellectual property while ensuring that the platform remained open to creativity and innovation. Every decision was intertwined with the others, forming a complex tapestry that Neal navigated with calm determination. Creativity and accountability became the twin pillars of his leadership. Neal encouraged teams to take intelligent risks, to push boundaries in design, product, and content innovation, while always considering the long-term impact of their choices. He emphasized transparency, both with creators and with the public, understanding that trust was fragile and had to be actively nurtured. Internally, he fostered collaboration across departments, knowing that YouTube's complexity required collective insight rather than isolated decision-making. This approach, rooted in empathy and rigor, became the hallmark of his tenure. At the same time, Neal remained deeply attuned to the human element of YouTube. He continued engaging with creators directly, listening to their concerns, celebrating their successes, and understanding the pressures they faced in an era of rapid change. These conversations informed policy decisions, product development, and global strategies. He recognized that creators were not just contributors to a platform, they were essential partners in shaping the cultural impact of YouTube. Their voices, he believed, had to be amplified, not diminished. The broader world watched as Neal assumed his new role. Analysts examined his every move, creators speculated on the direction he would take, and competitors studied the signals sent by his leadership. Yet Neal's focus remained inward, on YouTube's mission, its users, and its creators. He knew that public perception, while important, could never outweigh the responsibility of stewarding a platform that had become an integral part of daily life for billions. He approached this responsibility not with urgency for recognition, but with a long-term vision that sought to shape meaningful impact. Challenges came quickly, as they always do in leadership. Policy decisions sparked debates in the media. Content moderation issues arose across multiple regions simultaneously, and emerging technologies demanded swift yet considered responses. But Neal approached each challenge, as he always had, with steady observation, thoughtful engagement, and deliberate action. He relied on his deep understanding of YouTube's systems, his empathy for creators, and his ability to anticipate the ripple effects of decisions. In doing so, he transformed potential crises into opportunities for growth and learning. Through it all, Neal's focus remained on the future. He envisioned a YouTube that could serve every community, nurture creativity, and provide a space where voices, big and small, could be heard. He saw a platform that could educate, inspire, and connect people across cultures and continents. And most importantly, he recognized that the true measure of leadership was not in accolades or titles, but in the enduring impact of the decisions made, the culture cultivated, and the opportunities created for the millions who depended on YouTube every day. The moment of transition was complete, yet the journey was far from over. Neal Mohan had stepped into a role that would challenge every skill, every intuition, and every principle he had developed over years of navigating the complexities of technology, culture, and human behavior. But as he looked ahead, he felt the same quiet confidence that had guided him through every prior phase. The belief that steady leadership, rooted in empathy, vision, and responsibility, could guide YouTube into a future more extraordinary than anyone could yet imagine. With Neal Mohan now at the helm, YouTube entered a new era defined not by its past achievements, but by the possibilities that lay ahead. The platform, already a cultural and technological giant, faced the dual challenge of sustaining its influence while evolving to meet the demands of a rapidly changing digital world. Neal understood that leadership in this context required more than strategic acumen. It required vision, empathy, and an unwavering commitment to the people who made YouTube what it was, the creators, the viewers, and the teams that worked tirelessly behind the scenes. From the very first weeks, Neal immersed himself in understanding every corner of the platform. He met with engineering teams to discuss the scalability of emerging technologies, from AI-driven recommendation systems to advanced moderation tools. He held sessions with product teams, exploring ways to enhance the creator experience without overwhelming them with complexity. Policy discussions became more frequent, touching on issues as varied as content safety, global regulations, and the ethical use of algorithms. Neal's approach was methodical. He didn't rush decisions, and he rarely imposed directives. Instead, he cultivated alignment, fostering collaboration across departments that had historically operated in silos. Creators, the lifeblood of YouTube, became an even more central focus. Neal had long believed that a platform's success was inseparable from the success of its creators. He personally reached out to many, listening to their stories, understanding their struggles, and seeking their input on initiatives designed to improve the platform. For creators, these conversations were unprecedented. They weren't used to executives taking the time to engage deeply with their work, to understand the pressures of growing a channel, of navigating algorithm changes, or of sustaining a creative career under the constant glare of global attention. Neal's willingness to listen fostered trust, and trust became the foundation for YouTube's next phase of growth. At the same time, the external environment was shifting with dizzying speed. Social media platforms were evolving, attention spans were fragmenting, and audiences were increasingly demanding shorter, more engaging content. YouTube had pioneered long-form video, but the rise of competing formats presented both a challenge and an opportunity. Neal saw this not as a threat, but as a chance to expand the creative possibilities of the platform. He championed the development of new formats that would allow creators to experiment, adapt, and reach audiences in ways that were both innovative and meaningful. The goal was clear. YouTube had to remain a place where creators could tell stories in the format that best suited their vision, without sacrificing the platform's depth or quality. Navigating these waters required balancing ambition with restraint. Neal knew that YouTube's growth could not come at the expense of trust. Misinformation, harmful content, and the complexities of moderating billions of daily interactions were constant challenges. Policies needed to be fair, effective, and globally adaptable, a task that demanded both technical insight and cultural sensitivity. Neal's leadership style, rooted in listening and empathy, became crucial. He worked to ensure that policies were informed by real-world experiences, not just theoretical models, and that decisions reflected both the ethical responsibilities and the practical realities of running a platform of unparalleled scale. As the months progressed, Neal also focused on long-term strategic vision. He encouraged teams to think beyond immediate metrics like watch time or engagement, and to consider the broader impact of their work on global culture, education, and information. Educational initiatives gained momentum, creator support programs expanded, and technology investments were guided by the principle that YouTube should not only entertain, but also inform, inspire, and empower. Every decision, every initiative, every adjustment reflected a deep understanding of YouTube's role in shaping the way the world communicates and learns. Inside the company, Neal's presence was transforming the culture. Teams began to operate with greater alignment, driven by a shared sense of purpose. Collaboration replaced competition, transparency replaced opacity, and empathy became a guiding principle across departments. Employees noticed that leadership under Neal was not about directives or top-down authority. It was about guidance, support, and shared responsibility. This subtle but profound shift infused the organization with energy, creativity, and focus, positioning YouTube to navigate the complexities of a digital world that was constantly evolving. Even as the platform evolved, Neal remained grounded in the fundamentals that had always defined his approach: clarity, empathy, and vision. He believed that technology was only as meaningful as the people it served. Algorithms and features mattered, but only insofar as they empowered creators and enriched viewer experiences. This philosophy guided decisions big and small, from the development of creator tools to the implementation of content moderation systems. It was a reminder to everyone at YouTube that at the heart of the platform was human connection, not just data. And so, as Neal Mohan continued to settle into his role, the platform stood on the brink of a new era. The challenges were immense, the responsibilities unprecedented, yet the possibilities were extraordinary. Neal's leadership was no longer defined solely by his understanding of technology or strategy. It was defined by the quiet, steadfast way he approached one of the most complex and influential platforms in the world. YouTube, under his guidance, was preparing to step into a future that would test every lesson Neal had learned, every insight he had gained, and every value he had held throughout his remarkable journey. As Neal Mohan settled into his new role, the challenges intensified, but so did the opportunities. YouTube had grown beyond a platform into a global ecosystem, a place where billions of people found entertainment, education, and connection. With this scale came scrutiny from governments, media, creators, and users alike. Every feature update, every policy decision, every shift in algorithm had the potential to spark conversations that reverberated across continents. Neal knew that leadership at this level required patience, foresight, and an unwavering focus on the long-term vision. One of his first priorities was strengthening the relationship with creators. These were the people whose voices defined YouTube, whose work shaped its culture, and whose trust would determine the platform's future. Neal believed that creators deserved clarity, fairness, and support. He initiated programs to give them more transparency on monetization, algorithmic recommendations, and community guidelines. He encouraged direct feedback sessions and often joined them himself, listening intently to concerns about burnout, revenue volatility, and audience engagement. To him, these were not mere complaints, they were signals guiding him toward policies and tools that could sustain creativity on a massive scale. At the same time, Neal had to navigate the rapidly changing technological landscape. Short-form video was rising explosively, with competitors pushing innovative formats and attention spans, fragmenting faster than ever. Neal saw opportunity rather than threat. He encouraged teams to experiment with formats like YouTube Shorts, blending immediacy with creativity while ensuring the platform's core identity remained intact. His approach was not to chase trends blindly, but to integrate innovation in a way that strengthened the ecosystem and expanded creative possibilities for both emerging and established creators. Global responsibility was another dimension of Neal's leadership. YouTube operated in dozens of countries, each with unique cultural, legal, and regulatory frameworks. Policy decisions had to balance safety, freedom of expression, and compliance. Neal led discussions with a keen sense of nuance, understanding that decisions in one region could have ripple effects worldwide. He emphasized listening to local teams and stakeholders, building a system of checks and guidance that prioritized fairness and accountability without stifling creativity. This approach reinforced the platform's credibility and trustworthiness in an era when both were constantly tested. Within the company, Neal's leadership style began reshaping YouTube's culture. Collaboration became more pronounced, and cross-departmental alignment improved. Engineers, product managers, and policy teams learned to navigate complex challenges together, guided by Neal's insistence on clarity, empathy, and evidence-based decision-making. He inspired confidence without commanding it, fostering an environment where employees felt empowered to experiment, fail, and iterate without fear. It was a quiet transformation, one that strengthened YouTube's resilience as much as its innovation. In the background, the world's expectations were shifting. Users demanded more personalized experiences, creators demanded more control, and society at large scrutinized the influence of platforms on culture, politics, and knowledge. Neal faced questions not just about growth, but about purpose. He recognized that YouTube's role was bigger than entertainment. It was shaping the way people learned, interacted, and understood the world. Leadership, he realized, was not about moving fastest or appearing boldest. It was about moving responsibly, with humanity at the center of every decision. Despite the weight of these responsibilities, Neal continued to maintain a calm presence, a steadiness that became his signature. He spent hours understanding the details of the platform, from algorithmic nuances to creator behavior patterns. He met frequently with diverse teams, drawing on their expertise to inform strategic decisions, and in every interaction, he reinforced a philosophy that would guide YouTube into the future: that technology is only meaningful when it serves people, creativity, and communities, and that leadership is measured not in titles or recognition, but in trust earned and impact made. As Neal navigated these complexities, he began shaping the next chapter of YouTube. He invested in initiatives that would enhance content discovery, expand educational resources, and empower creators to pursue careers sustainably. He championed AI innovations that would improve the platform while mitigating risks, and he strengthened partnerships that amplified YouTube's global reach responsibly. Through it all, Neal's focus remained unwavering: to ensure that YouTube remained a space where creativity could thrive, communities could grow, and the world could connect. As Neal Mohan moved further into his leadership role, the scope of responsibility became increasingly apparent. YouTube was no longer just a platform, it was a reflection of society itself, a mirror of human curiosity, creativity, and communication on a massive scale. Every change to the interface, every tweak to the recommendation algorithm, and every policy adjustment had ramifications that reached billions of users worldwide. Neal approached each decision with deliberate care, understanding that the power he now wielded was intertwined with a duty far greater than personal ambition. One of the first areas Neal focused on was enhancing the creator experience in a way that was both immediate and sustainable. He recognized that creators were the lifeblood of YouTube and that their success directly influenced the platform's vitality. Monetization programs were reassessed to reward consistency and innovation, not just viral spikes. Creator education initiatives expanded, offering guidance on building sustainable careers, navigating algorithm changes, and managing mental health. Neal insisted on listening tours, speaking directly with creators to hear their stories unfiltered, noting patterns, challenges, and opportunities in real time. These interactions were not just symbolic, they directly shaped policy and product decisions. Simultaneously, the competitive landscape demanded agility. Short-form video had taken the world by storm, with platforms like TikTok redefining audience expectations. Neal didn't view this as a threat, but as a signal for evolution. He championed YouTube Shorts as a complementary experience, not a replacement for traditional long-form content. By providing creators with versatile tools and flexible formats, he enabled them to engage audiences in new ways without abandoning the depth that had historically distinguished YouTube. This strategy reflected his broader philosophy: adaptation without compromise, innovation without sacrificing foundational values. Global considerations also defined his approach. With YouTube operating across more than 100 countries, regulatory and cultural nuances created challenges that required both diplomacy and precision. Neal engaged with international teams to ensure policies were locally relevant yet globally coherent. He approached regulators with transparency and an openness to collaboration, advocating for solutions that prioritized user safety while preserving freedom of expression. At the same time, internal processes were strengthened to ensure content moderation was consistent, fair, and scalable. Neal's goal was to make YouTube not just a platform people loved, but a platform people could trust. Within the company, Neal's influence extended beyond policy and product. He was reshaping the organizational culture itself. He encouraged interdisciplinary collaboration, breaking down silos between engineering, product, policy, and creator relations. Teams were inspired to tackle challenges with creativity and accountability, understanding that their work was interconnected and impactful. Neal's approach emphasized learning from failures as much as celebrating successes, fostering an environment where risk-taking was supported but measured, and where innovation could flourish alongside responsibility. Beyond structural and operational decisions, Neal also focused on envisioning YouTube's long-term trajectory. He invested in emerging technologies, AI capabilities, and creative tools that would empower both viewers and creators. He considered not just how people consumed content today, but how they might engage with media, information, and each other in the decades to come. Educational initiatives received particular attention, with Neal envisioning YouTube as a global classroom, a place where anyone, anywhere, could access knowledge and skills that were previously out of reach. Yet for all the scale and complexity, Neal remained grounded in human-centered leadership. He continued to engage personally with creators and employees, valuing their perspectives and ensuring that every decision accounted for the real-world impact on individuals and communities. He understood that the essence of YouTube's influence lay not in algorithms or metrics, but in the human stories it enabled, stories of learning, growth, connection, and creativity. Even in moments of intense pressure, Neal maintained a steady, calm presence. The weight of global scrutiny, rapid technological change, and the high stakes of leadership could have overwhelmed anyone. But he navigated each challenge with the quiet confidence that had become his hallmark. It was this calm decisiveness that allowed him to transform potential crises into opportunities for learning, innovation, and growth, strengthening both the platform and the teams that supported it. As Neal Mohan continued to guide YouTube into uncharted territory, it became increasingly clear that his tenure was not just about maintaining success, it was about shaping the future. Under his leadership, the platform was poised to deepen its cultural impact, empower creators, and navigate the complexities of a rapidly changing digital world. Neal's vision was both pragmatic and aspirational to ensure that YouTube remained a space where creativity could thrive, communities could flourish, and the world could connect through the shared power of video. The final phase of Neal Mohan's journey into leadership was marked not by dramatic announcements, but by the steady unfolding of influence and impact. As he stepped fully into the role of guiding YouTube, every decision, every conversation, and every strategic initiative carried weight, not only for the company, but for the global community it touched daily. Neal understood that leadership at this scale was measured not by titles or recognition, but by the tangible effects on creators, viewers, and employees worldwide. One of Neal's immediate focuses was reinforcing the creator ecosystem. He recognized that sustaining YouTube's growth depended on the success and well-being of its creators. He expanded educational programs, mentorship opportunities, and financial support structures, ensuring creators had the tools to innovate without fear of burnout. Neal personally engaged with creators from all corners of the globe, listening to their stories, challenges, and aspirations. These conversations were not mere formalities. They directly influenced policy, product development, and strategic priorities, shaping a platform that was increasingly creator-centric. Simultaneously, Neal continued to oversee the evolution of YouTube's technology. He championed AI-driven innovations that improved content discovery, enhanced user experiences, and maintained the delicate balance between personalization and privacy. He ensured these advancements were implemented thoughtfully with safeguards to prevent misuse or unintended consequences. Neal's vision extended beyond the immediate horizon, imagining a YouTube that could anticipate the needs of creators and viewers while remaining ethical, inclusive, and responsible. Global considerations remained at the forefront of Neal's leadership. Operating across countless countries, YouTube had to navigate a complex web of legal, cultural, and ethical challenges. Neal emphasized collaboration and consultation, engaging local teams and external experts to create policies that were effective yet respectful of regional differences. By prioritizing fairness, transparency, and human impact, he strengthened the platform's credibility and trust on a global scale. Within the company, Neal's presence continued to reshape the culture. Teams became more aligned, collaborative, and empowered, learning to approach challenges creatively and responsibly. He reinforced a philosophy that risk-taking and innovation must be guided by ethics and empathy. Employees reported feeling a renewed sense of purpose under his leadership, inspired not by authority alone, but by the example of deliberate, thoughtful guidance. As Neal guided YouTube into the future, he also maintained a sharp focus on its broader mission, connecting the world through video. Initiatives to enhance educational content, foster meaningful communities, and support diverse voices expanded under his leadership. He envisioned a platform where anyone, anywhere, could learn, create, and engage. A platform that not only entertained but also inspired, informed, and empowered. Despite the immense responsibilities, Neal's approach remained calm, methodical, and human-centered. He understood that leadership was not about reacting to every challenge, but about cultivating a resilient, adaptable organization capable of thriving in a rapidly evolving digital world. Through his steady guidance, YouTube continued to grow, innovate, and set standards for what a global platform could achieve responsibly. By the end of this chapter, Neal Mohan had solidified his role not just as a CEO, but as a steward of one of the most influential platforms in human history. His tenure reflected a balance of vision, empathy, and strategic foresight, a testament to years of preparation, careful decision-making, and an unwavering commitment to creators, users, and the broader digital ecosystem. YouTube's trajectory was forever shaped by his leadership, and the platform entered a new era defined by responsible innovation, creator empowerment, and global connection. As we reflect on Neal Mohan's journey, it becomes clear that leadership is rarely about grandeur or spectacle. It is measured in quiet decisions, steady guidance, and the ability to see beyond immediate pressures to a broader vision. Neal's story is a testament to patience, empathy, and the power of thoughtful stewardship in shaping not just a company, but the experiences of billions around the world. YouTube today stands as a reflection of his principles, a platform that empowers creators, informs viewers, and connects communities across continents. The challenges Neal faced were immense, but through calm determination and strategic insight, he guided YouTube into a future where innovation and responsibility coexist, where creativity is nurtured, and where the impact of human connection is amplified through technology. His journey reminds us that influence is not merely wielded, it is cultivated. That meaningful change emerges not from haste, but from careful, consistent action. And that the greatest leaders are those who balance vision with humility, ambition with empathy, and power with responsibility. Neal Mohan's story is far from a conclusion. It is a continuing journey, one that will shape the future of digital culture, creativity, and global connection for years to come. And as YouTube continues to evolve under his guidance, millions of creators and viewers alike can witness the quiet, deliberate craftsmanship of a leader who understands that the true legacy of a platform lies not in its scale, but in the lives it touches every single day.